All right, good morning, everybody. It is the morning after the Super Bowl. Hopefully, everyone enjoyed watching football. But now we get to turn the page, get to turn the chapter, and it is NASCAR Speed Week. So it's the Daytona 500 week. We got the Daytona 500 coming up on Sunday. And basically, we got NASCAR action on track every single night, whether it's the Cup Series, the Truck Series, the Xfinity Series, starting Wednesday night with single car qualifying rolling all the way through Sunday, leading up to the Daytona 500. So one of my favorite weeks of the year. I know we had the Busch Light Clash at the LA Coliseum the other week. That was more or less kind of just an exhibition race, just kind of for fun. This is really when the season begins. This is a points paying race. This is when you can potentially lock yourself into the playoffs. Starting this weekend. So super excited. Should be a fun time. We got nonstop NASCAR action, I think, for the next like 36, 37, 38 weekends. So it'll be a fun 2023 season. So let's talk about the duels. So this video is really going over the duels. What the heck are they, and more importantly, how do we want to approach it from a DFS perspective? So if you're not familiar, the duels are more or less qualifying races for the Daytona 500. They are somewhat similar to the heat races that we had at the Busch Light Clash, but they're also very different in the same regard. So what's going to happen is Wednesday night, we're going to go to Daytona, and it's going to be for the Cup Series. It's going to be single car qualifying. Now, the only two positions that really matter at a single car qualifying are if you qualify on the front row, whether that's first or second. So if you are able to finish first or second in the single car qualifying runs on Wednesday night, you are locked in for your starting position for Sunday night, and you more or less have nothing to gain. So the Daytona 500 is going to be locked in from single car qualifying that takes place on Wednesday night. All the rest of the cars in the field, except for the open cars, which we'll get to them, more or less have to race their way or determine their starting position from these dual races, which are going to take place on Thursday night. So there's two dual races. The NASCAR is going to go ahead and split the field in half. So half the field is going to take place in dual race number one. Once that one concludes, half the rest of the field is going to take place in dual race number two. They're more or less kind of short qualifying races. You can think of all these teams are using these cars for the Daytona 500. So normally they are very, caution free. We don't really see a lot of accidents. It's more or less just people getting familiar with racing in a pack, trying to understand how their car is going to maneuver, what potential adjustments they have to work on, how the car is drafting, so on and so forth. So when we get to DFS, there's a couple of trends that we've seen in the past that we want to implement with our lineup moving forward. So the first thing is we want to fade the pole sitters for the dual races. So, whoever qualifies first in single car qualifying is probably going to start first with dual race number one. Same with whoever qualifies second in single car qualifying on Wednesday. They're going to start, first in dual race number two. Well, these drivers have absolutely nothing to gain. Their starting positions are locked in. Yeah, they might race for, a third of the race or maybe even a half of the race. But after that, what we've seen in the past is usually these drivers just pull to the rear of the field and they just more or less ride around, because the last thing they want to do is damage, wreck or mess up the car that they have. I mean, obviously it's going to be a pretty quick car if it was able to get the pole. And even if they finish first, it's not like their starting position is going to change. If they finish last, it's not like their starting position is going to change for the 500. So really want absolutely nothing to do with the pole sitters for the dual races. The other thing that we have to keep in mind is if you have a charter, you're more or less you are locked in for the Daytona 500. But what we see is there's also open teams that arrive to Daytona with the hopes of trying to race their way in. Very similar that we saw at the Busch Light Clash, teams trying to race their way in for the main event. I don't know how many open cars there are. I think somewhere between 6 and 8, I think are showing up. Two of them are to get locked in with single car qualifying speed on Wednesday night. And then the rest of the open teams who aren't in the top two with single car qualifying, these dual races are extremely important to them. The dual races are more or less for these open teams to figure out, which of them are going to take the green flag on Sunday and which of them are going home, Thursday after the duels conclude because they didn't qualify for the event. So think of it kind of as like a race within a race. You'll see, everyone racing, and then you'll probably see on the score ticker it'll be like, here are the two open cars, and only one of them, can advance, and they're more or less kind of racing each other. Those cars were usually fade too because they really only care about beating one other person. So if you finish 17th and the other guy's at 19th, hey, that's a win in your book. And usually these open car teams don't always have the speed or the ability to kind of stick with the main pack as well. So normally they are kind of racing towards the tail end of the field. I said the duels are usually really calm with little to no wreck. So if you aren't familiar with the duels, you're going to hear a lot of stack the back, hey, we need place differential, just play cars as deep in the field as possible, which is true, when we get to the Daytona 500, but we're not talking about the Daytona 500. We're talking about the duels. So the duels, like I said, they're usually more calm, very, very little, cautions, or, in the past, we don't really see a lot of wrecks, a lot of aggression. It's more or less just, a very calm race. So that being said, you really want to focus on cars that kind of start kind of middle of the pack, not really focusing on the tail end of the field, because if you're starting in the tail end of the field, usually your car just doesn't really have the speed, especially if you're not an open car with much to gain. There's just not a lot of opportunity for points. So I would rather focus on drivers that have great finishing potential. We talked a lot about this with the Busch Light Clash. Like, yeah, place differential is great and all, and we'd love to get some, but our main focus is what drivers can we get into our lineup that have the ability to finish, top 8, top 10, ideally top 5. And it's really looking at A, the equipment that driver is in, and B, who that driver is. There's definitely a difference between some of the top tier drivers and the top teams versus, some of the mid pack teams, or even some of the bottom tier teams. And again, there's really nothing to gain here unless you're an open car. So our core and pool of drivers are going to be more middle of the pack. In summary, we're going to fade the front row pole sitter. We're going to fade the tail end of the field. And our core is going to be drivers who start kind of middle of the pack. So this isn't correct. This is just kind of a format. So basically what's going to happen is, like I said, the field will get cut in half. We'll put all the salary, the starting positions, the interest in here. But, if this was the starting lineup per se, like our focus is probably going to be from like Ryan Blaney down to, Bubba Wallace, like kind of that mid range is more or less kind of what we want. And this is just a dummy, starting grid. These drivers may or may not even be in dual race 1. So it's still early in the week. So we'll get that updated. We'll post it on Twitter, which is @FastCarsFM. You'll see that on Wednesday night, probably after the qualifying is done, once we know the starting positions for the duels. And then later this week, we'll put out a Daytona 500 strategy video, which is going to look a lot different than the dual strategy. So yeah, hopefully that's helpful. Like I said, the duels kind of its own animal, its own beast. Got a lot of, NASCAR DFS content coming out in 2023. So yeah, it's kind of the initial thoughts and previews. Best of luck to everyone else playing this week. And we'll catch you on the next one.